Let's get a bit of an understanding about what does Saturn mean for us in the birth chart. Let's spend a little bit of time reflecting on the context of this energy so that when we are looking at it in our chart, when we are emotionally bonding and connecting with Saturn in our chart, we can see our own psychological reflection back at us, our own psyche reflect back to us. Okay, so Saturn reflects where we are in time. Okay, Saturn reflects where we are in time. Our bodies are the mirrors of our conditioning. This is a really profound thing to understand about the nature of Saturn, because I chose this picture specifically to illustrate that our body is very, very limited in terms of traveling far distances instantaneously. Inherently, just by studying the nature of your body, you can see that you have this form that has an energetic resonance with it. Okay, it is who you are. It is the scars that you have on your body, the cuts that you've had, the shape of your fingernails, the shape of your fingers. If you have to observe your palms, you would see that there are these lines that exist in it. The color of your skin. Do you have freckles? Do you have a certain type of skin type that is translucent, or is your skin thick? All of the things that I've invited you to observe about your structure of your body is, in a sense, the Saturn archetype in your natal chart. Okay? Saturn reflects where we are in time. For me, currently, right now, as I record this video, I'm situated in Sweden. That's where I am in time. I'm in the country of Sweden. Now, if I take my awareness and I extend it a little bit further outside of myself, I can observe that there's a specific town that I live within. That specific town has a certain way of appearing. In other words, the roads have been constructed a certain way. There are certain buildings around me over here in which people live. Everything has a very unique structure to it. When we are in our hometown, we take it for granted that the environment that is around us is something that is there, and that's how it looks, and we feel safe emotionally around it. This is where we are in time. Think about the nature of your place that you are right now. Where are you in the world when you're listening to this and watching this? Where is your relationship and awareness to the emotional safety and familiarity that you feel in your surroundings? Can you describe it to me? Can you describe to me the way, what's the distance from your house to the store? How does that route become something that is familiar to you? And that is where you are in time. You're in this environment. Think about the county that you're in. Think about the state that you're in. Think about like in Sweden, they call it a commune, right? And the commune is called Istad, right? It's a part of a land that is essentially called Skåne. So this definition, that is Skåne, that is Istad, that is 17 Västerleden, right? This whole entire thing is definitions and boundaries that mirror and reflect where I am energetically in time. It's a very, very, very beautiful thing to reflect upon the nature of understanding Saturn in the chart, because when you begin to form a relationship with Saturn and you essentially are trying to know what your karma is about by looking at the sign that it's in and the house that is in, and say any planetary energies that it's in, you can immediately begin to see how your soul in time has created a necessary conditioning, a necessary boundary, necessary boundaries, or when I say boundaries, I simply mean, like, if you have a look at this picture over here, you can see that there's boundaries that defines the outside skirts of this person's body. And you notice that there's a square as well, right? There is this sense of definition that is held within the boundary. So the boundary becomes your family lineage. Your boundary becomes, what did mom and dad look like when you were growing up, and what type of genetics do they pass down into you? What type of imprinting do they carry that then becomes part of your own psyche story? For me, I have Saturn in Scorpio in the 10th house, and when I observe the nature of especially the parental, the father figures in my life, both of them had deep trauma regarding the abandonment of their own father that then became this unconscious material that would be projected onto me as a child, that essentially reflects my own relationship to and karmic genetic imprinting that comes with that symbolism in my chart. Now, what I can do with that information is observe my own sense of boundaries and structures that may or may not have been developed healthily when my own parents were setting the boundaries and structures in their own life, and I was growing up into that. Remember, this is a Saturn cycles teaching. So what we are essentially looking at here is, how does our form become our form as we come into this world? What are the conditions around that? What is the time that Saturn is reflecting our bodies in? And what is the conditioning around that? Okay. If you observe on you over here, and Saturn reflects our emotional, that's just a typo over there, so I'm sorry. Saturn reflects our emotional layering that has been imprinted as you grow in life. This is such a beautiful picture to capture the essence of the more abstractness that is Saturn in our chart. This picture over here reflects the physical definition, the physical name that has been given to you, the boundaries, the way that your body is formed. Are you athletic? Are you skinny? Are you sort of bulky? Do you have short arms and short legs, but big thighs? This is the type of thing. What is your shape? Is that physical sense there? But the emotional imprinting that is very, very uniquely connected and tied in with this definition. What is the spiritual work that comes with Saturn? So Saturn reflects to us the emotional layering that has been imprinted as you grow in life. Remember, if you are looking at yourself in time right now and you observe what around you is your reality. What is your reality around you? Is it, I don't even want to go into that because it can be so many things, but when I specifically say that, is what is your emotional relationship to the things that you have around you? How do they operate? How is your emotional maturity reflected in your ability to be self-empowered? So Saturn reflects our emotional layering as that has been imprinted in as we grow in life. And so mom and dad will have their own ideologies and their own perspectives. And you might have Saturn in Sagittarius trining Uranus, and you will notice that maybe there's some eccentric parental choices that you grew up with. Maybe mom and dad didn't choose to keep you or like let you go to school, but actually homeschool you, as an example. Maybe you have, like with myself, Saturn in the 10th house in Scorpio, and when I was 5 years old and Pluto transited over my Saturn, my mom and dad split, and both my mom and dad got remarried. And essentially, I merged with four parents who, in and of themselves, had this very unique Saturnian story to them, where my mother's partner drew in a relationship that had a very disempowering relationship to their dad that then became their trauma that they projected onto my brother. And so, even though it's not necessarily Saturn on me particularly, it is Saturn through the family structure and how I've observed what an authority in a disempowered state can really do. With my dad, married somebody that had very strong emotional boundaries, and yet they were so firm that it almost, in a sense, felt too assertive, too controlling. What type of emotional layering sits within our psyche with Saturn in our chart? And so this is a great invitation to observe this picture over here. Okay. So the first Saturn square happens at 7 years old. Okay, the first Saturn square happens at 7 years old. And this is a period of time where the sense of childlikeness that we carry from the age of 0 up until 7 begins to have its first earthly grounding, developing sense of awareness occur. In other words, when Saturn moves to its first square, which is, if you have a look at this diagram over here, I've specifically chosen it. So if you had, like, let's say you have Saturn in your first house over here. When you turn 7, Saturn would have moved 90 degrees, which is usually 3 signs away, from its original point. So if Saturn was in the first house, the first quarter square will take place or in your 4th house. If you had Saturn in your 2nd house, most likely it would occur in your 5th house. Do you see the point here? So what I want you to do is I want you to look at where your natal Saturn is, and I then want you to either so take your natal Saturn and literally just move your finger across your chart until eventually you reach 90 degrees from the original Saturn. So if your Saturn's at 18 degrees Cancer, you will then look at 18 degrees Libra. Okay? Do you follow over here? So if your Saturn was in Leo, I would like you to look at Scorpio. If your Saturn was in Virgo, I'd like you to look at Sagittarius. If your Saturn is in Libra, I'd like you to look at Capricorn. Right? Capricorn. So again, if your Saturn was at like 12 degrees Virgo, you're going to now look to 12 degrees Sagittarius. Do you see the thread here? Okay. Right, let's just do this quickly again. If your Saturn is in Aquarius, you would immediately look to Taurus. Okay, so if your Saturn was 11 degrees Aquarius, you would look to 11 degrees of Taurus. If it's Pisces, you would look to Gemini. If it's Aries, you would look to Cancer. If it's Taurus, you would look to Leo. If it's Gemini, you would look to Virgo. Okay, so I've gone around the chart for everybody. Right, so that's one way of doing it. The other way you can do it is if you just go to astro.com and you adjust the transits on astro.com to reflect 7 years from when you were born. So if it was me, I would go to the 26th of October, 1990 to look when my first Saturn was occurring. And what actually happened for me was that I landed up in hospital with this thing called tracheobronchitis. And when my Saturn begins to do any of these squares, it actually hits my natal Mercury and Pluto. So I tend to have voice challenges during that period of time because Saturn was really reflecting the karmic complexity around what it means to have my voice expressed and heard. So here we have this first quarter square. That's what it's called. And it happens at 7 years old. and it's the formation of the ego. Like I said, from zero, from the age of when you were born up until 7, you are essentially ungrounded. You are essentially in an experience where your sense of boundaries, your sense of self, your sense of limitations are essentially none. There isn't there. And I invite you to observe the progression of a child from the age of 0 up until 7. And you will actually start to notice that at the age of 7, they will start to sense that, oh, maybe I can't jump off the bed or the bunk bed, as an example, because I could hurt myself. Or if I do this over here, then this is the repercussion. It's that there's a recognition that in our world that we live within, there is a physical boundariness to it. And when we interact with that, we recognize our limitations. And so in that developing awareness of seeing these limitations, do we begin to then we begin to form and crystallize our first realizations that we are in a world that has these limitations, that has these boundaries, that has this very limited sense of time. So the formation at 7 years old is a very important period. I mean, not only is it important in terms of opposition and other oppositions, but it's an important time because it can really reflect to you the most intense, but also at the same time, the foundation of what is essentially going to be in your psychological nature when you are developing your sense of self. You must remember that Saturn is very much the way that we are able to understand ourselves in the physical form. And so our sense of self is very strongly connected with the developing phases of Saturn. So as we learn to develop these new boundaries, as life brings us experiences through our parents, and you'll notice that people will go through critical changes in their lives during this period of time. I know a couple of people in which family got divorced, a couple of people where there was a traumatic experience, and other people where there were positive things that happened. It's not always going to be something negative or challenging, but essentially this is a very critical time in which this formation is occurring. It's the first phases. So if you really want to get a deep understanding of your karmic complexity with Saturn, I would absolutely study the nature of the first quarter square that was taking place and what types of angles were happening at that stage. Right. So now that we have this first Saturn square undertaken, this is the formation of the ego. This is the developing state in which our first sense of self is occurring. We're becoming aware that there are limitations. We're becoming aware that our experience is something not just ungrounded,